as well for hosting this event. And I'm so very happy to have your support to gather 4 poets to discuss and read poetry about uprising and taking a stand. I'm gonna start. Do you want me to start? Do you want me to move along the conversation? Honestly, I drew a blank.
So we were just talking with our fabulous poets right before we started about the language of uprisings and how what they are and how they come about. I guess we'll have some discussion around there towards the end, but maybe if we want to just start with recapping kind of what we've talked about so far, and then we'll move into the readings. That would be good.
Okay. We've been talking about what it means for us, what it is the language of uprising for us. If each of us has experienced uprisings in different ways, either because we have stood up against a dictator, or because we have stood up against the machinery of war, or because we have stood up against racism and oppression in the United States. Each one of us come from a different background, and each one of us has experienced the need to raise the voice for different reasons. And so that's why we are here today, because we have that in common. We have the need to stand up against an oppressor, whichever form that oppressor has taken in our lives. We've discussed a little bit of our role as uprisers and our role as poets and uprisers. What is it that we do as poets and to uprise? Okay, so I would like to start our reading by calling Deborah to read her pieces and to move on. But let's introduce Deborah with her a bio, please.
I'll do that. Let's see. Deborah J Hunter is a Tulsa poet, spoken word artist, essayist, actor, teaching artist, workshop facilitator, and social justice activist. She received a Greenwood Art Project grant to stage her original play, Porches, during the centennial observance of the 1921 Black Wall Street Massacre. She was presented a 2018 Woman of the Year Pinnacle Award, the 2000 Jingle Feldman Artist Award, and was a 2013 Oklahoma Poet Laureate finalist. Although her poetry has been published in literary journals and anthologies, she is best known for her voice and delivery style. Hunter has been an outspoken advocate on issues related to homelessness and mental illness for more than 20 years.
Thank you, Cody. This first poem is called My Poems Are Too Loud. I had been reading writers of prize-winning poetry, gracious words and soothing voices by proper poets who lull their audiences into the lush comfort of privilege with poems about sailboats and houses by the ocean, cabins in the mountains, villas on the outskirts of Rome or Athens or Paris. But my poems are not quiet, not suitable for prizes and literary pages. I imagine, while filing my letters of rejection, dark-suited editors covering their ears or slumping over their desks as my words hit them in the chest like arrows that I draw and release one by one. They are befuddled by the barrage of bellowing bullets that I discharge from the smoking barrel of my Bic. I am a warrior with an infinite store of words in my arsenal, using diplomatic discourse with just enough sting to cause a brain itch or vocal visuals of venomous vocabulary when necessary. I move from horse stance to attack pose, fingers of death, grasping my quick on the draw quill. I am lethal. I am a warrior with a brain and a keyboard. I am a catalyst on a mission, and I can't accomplish what I must with pleasant words and a gentle voice, whispering about seagulls, ocean breezes, and cross-country train rides. There are children who are smoking, toking, snorting, shooting, leaning, dropping, popping, bonging, huffing, blunting their brains into oatmeal, while the government of them, by them, and for them wages a war against them. There are women who go down on their knees in private humiliation for the price of a hamburger that they may purchase fresh over the counter rather than accept the indignation of waiting in a public donut line. There are men who transfer their trauma into bullets and mortars and grenades in round after round while we keep saying what goes around comes around, and it does, not in justice or karma, but in round after round of pain. Reality exists in other dimensions for thousands who live on sidewalks while their brains lie to them with disembodied tongues in a society that turns up its nose, steps over them, walks around them, scrapes them from the soles of their shoes. I am a political poet. I am a word warrior. I am tea in a petite package with a short fuse. I cannot expound on the banalities of leisure while people are shut out, shut in, shut up, jailed in, pinned in, locked down, ignored, ignobled, interned, frustrated, debilitated, obliterated, and I am not going to be quiet about it. And this next poem is a little bit more historical. I was not made for this. My feet were made for walking, running, jumping, dancing. My feet were not made for shackles. My private place is sacred space for caressing, stroking, birthing. My private place is not a vessel for violence. My hands were made for work, play, healing, loving. My hands were not made for chains. My neck was made for adornment, kissing, holding my head up. My neck was not made for the noose. I was made to live a life of freedom. I was not made to be a slave. I was not created to cross deep water, stacked in the belly of a vessel, bred like livestock, lashed and flayed, frozen in winter, baked in summer, starved in the midst of abundance, denied even the release of death. I was not created in the image of Yahweh, Jehovah. I was created in the image of Mut, Isis, Orisha, Yemaya, dark-skinned beauties of birth, healing, war, love. I am their daughter, torn away, my insides ripped and ravaged, my body scarred, my life no longer my own. I did not choose to be a slave. I did not choose to be here. I am not an animal. I am not the other. I am not inferior. I am woman, and you know this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a powerful couple of pieces. And now we know who you are. Okay, we're going to continue with Leonora. And have the Leonora's bio somewhere. Can pull it here too. Cody, do you have Leonora's bio?
Yep, I can do this. Let's see. Leonora Simonovis. I'll try that again. Leonora Simonovis is a Venezuelan poet and VONA alum, which is Voices of Our Nation, wonderful program. A VONA alum who currently lives in San Diego, California. She teaches literature and creative writing in Spanish at the University of San Diego, has an MFA in creative writing from Antioch University, Los Angeles, and is a contributing editor for Drizzle Review. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming from Gargoyle Magazine, Diode Poetry Journal, The Rumpus, Arkansas International, Poets Reading the News, Inverted Syntax, and Tinderbox Poetry Journal, among others. Welcome, Leonora.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Lisbeth, for the invitation. That was a beautiful reading, Deborah. Okay, so I am going to read 5 poems, and each of these poems came from a question. So rather than answering, I'm just exploring. And one of the questions was, how can we find beauty and joy in the midst of violence and chaos and all of that? And the other question is, how has colonial discourse and colonial rule affected us, and to what extent? So the first poem is called Maps. In the beginning, we were yellow, brown, blue, black stalks, teeth clattering for wind, ground with mortar and pestle, scattered into ocean. No snake in this story, no body to tempt an exile. On the 7th day, the rivers bruised like drumskin. We are children of corn and fish bones, cleaved by starlight and spit, thousands of years tall and still untamed. Our homes taken, we dream the pestle as mortar. Our mothers' hips carry the embers of dawn. Their hands yield the sweetest dough, cradle our faces, brush crumbs off of our lips. We eat so we remember how bodies are sharpened. We rinse stories out of the sea that was river. They shapeshift into kernels, rewrite themselves in orbit. For a moment, words hover at the edge of consciousness. For a moment, we are a sketch of our own making. And the next 2 poems are about my homeland, Venezuela, and they, I'm sure, are in dialogue with Lisbeth's own work. Revolutionary, Caracas, Venezuela, March 2019. Luisa's boy pulls a McDonald's wrap from the trash and licks the ketchup off it. At the morgue, soldiers thrift bullets from already cold flesh. Have you ever held a gun? Felt its sorrow-heavy body? A red beret is not a trend, but a uniform, which is man and gun, or maybe a song with the word freedom, a spell for eager crowds. But the problem has never been the boy's hunger, the lack of bullets, the uniform. It's the song. Listen to it. Tell me when the voice you hear is your own. Mozart in the 21st century, and this poem begins with an epigraph. Venezuelan Willie Arteaga is an activist who was detained and tortured by authorities in 2017 for protesting against the Maduro regime while playing his violin in public. And there's a little bit of violence. It's not graphic, but just a warning. He plays the national anthem on his violin while people cradle a yellow, blue, and red flag. 7 white stars drop from the fringe. They sing Gloria al Bravo Pueblo, arms in the air, mouth shaped like the tip of a gun. The O in Pueblo barrels with such force, 10 police officers surround the boy. What was he, 18, 19? And yank his violin away. That bow is a weapon, says one. Sing with us, the boy says, ustedes son pueblo también. But their loyalty is out of tune with their uniforms. The boy in a cell, his fingers broken. Outside the crowd swells like his bruised jaw, their song unstoppable. Once he heard them through the ringing in his ears. Once they surrounded his city, a memory in black and white. Once he strung a melody on the echoes of thunder. And this next poem is about language and how how those of us who speak more than one language or who think or live in more than one language sometimes can experience this sort of like dissociation or weird confusion when we are not really thinking about it. And what comes of it is a lot of play, and sometimes it can be fun, I guess. I misread a sign. I misread a sign and turn flesh showgirls into fresh snow girls. I'm curious about what slips between the cracks, the way an R stretches its alveolar possibilities. In FRESH, the H bowing out of her imposed silence, becoming nasal instead. A naked limb of light reveals less than intended. The unfeasibility of semantics, the sign of a tongue twisting symbols. When the ballerina heard the first notes of Swan Lake, her wrists, frozen by a terminal illness, circle up and up, more signet than swan. Away from the lake and the promise of silence, they fly in unison. And my last poem, I want to leave you with bedtime stories. Every witch moth has a pact with death. All night, she soars towards light. Until paralyzed by pleasure, she plummets, bending gravity around the center of her own galaxy. In these stories, bat-shaped wings the color of the devil's tail slap the walls of children's dreams. A child wakes, looks up, and is deprived of sight. In the morning, his mother finds the witch moth's body splayed as if wanting to be read. There's something satisfying about open endings, like the story we made up, you and I, breathless, after grazing the flame of a candle, fingers flushed with the promise of light. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonora. And one thing that I find in common is that you bring in your poetry of uprising, you bring the faces of the uprisings to the front, and because this is about the people who are doing this. The difference is that I never experienced the uprising. I've always been both a witness and a participant from afar, whereas you had to swallow the tear gases and much more than that in your family. I would like to continue with Teresa, and Cisco will read the bio for us.
Theresa May Chook, author of 3 collections of poetry. Am I making sure I'm unmuted? Yes, I'm unmuted. Okay. Her 3 collections of poetry, Red Thread from Fithian Press in 2012, Keeper of the Winds from Foothills Publishing in 2014, and Invisible Light from Many Voices Press in 2018. Teresa was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and immigrated to the US under political asylum as refugees of war with her mother and brother shortly after the American War in Vietnam, while her father remained in a Viet Cong re-education prison camp for 9 years. Since the age of 2, Teresa grew up in the Tongva village of Cajamonga, which is in Pasadena, California, where she still lives and loves. Teresa is a graduate of the Masters in Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont, and teaches literature and writing at a public high school in Los Angeles. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Lisbeth. Thank you, Deborah and Leonora, for your beautiful and powerful poetry. These poems that I'll be reading are based on true stories of my family and my experience. Immigration. It is October when the winds of autumn blow strong in the Pacific. There are over 2,000 of us, sardines, barely human and starving. We sleep on the floor and wash ourselves with seawater. People are sick. When someone dies from sickness, she or he is wrapped in a blanket and tossed overboard during a Buddhist chant. I was only 2 years old and cannot recollect the dying next to me, nor can I recollect my constant coughing, nor can I recall seeing my mother's worried countenance as she contemplated our future, how my constant crying made her want to jump overboard. Cockroaches. A proposal by someone to my mom after the Vietnam War. Why don't you sell your baby? You don't have anything to eat. A response by my 4-year-old brother. No, don't sell my sister. There are lots of cockroaches for us to eat. When I returned to the country 18 years later, I saw them, large, brown, shiny tanks on the wall, evidence of my brother's love for me. This next poem is about my name. Accents. Today, I decided to write with brush and ink my name in Vietnamese, Chuc Mi Due, the one on my birth certificate, with all of its beautiful accents, lightning above the U, ocean wave above the Y, mountaintop above and reflection of moon below the E. Today, I made 4 small marks and took back my native language. So I have 2 more poems. This poem is called Agent Orange, and as a lot of you know, Agent Orange was a chemical that the US military sprayed all over Vietnam. And there are still children to this day being born with the effects of Agent Orange. Agent Orange. It's difficult to be alone without a mother's touch, in a crib like a baby, except one is not. A son taught to live with a thirst for a mother who loves her child, though one of his legs is too short, the other too long. He sits arms bent and limp, but do not avoid him. He wants to interact. His swollen eyes and misshapen head leans back. In a dream, mother holds him close, as if by her embrace alone, she will somehow right the wrong. The chemical traveled through her placenta to the womb where small limbs that needed to form couldn't, where the tiny body the size of a fist no longer knew what to do. It was named for the orange band around each 55-gallon drum, orange as a sunrise that permeates one's soul, how its rays cover the sky and the earth with a deep orange, rising as those bodies also rise. This last poem that I'm going to read is called Agent Blue. Agent Blue was another chemical that was used on my homeland during the American War in Vietnam. Agent Blue. To kill correctly takes calculation down to a science. Arsenic, cocodilic acid, no water and rice on a cellular level. Make sure no surviving seed can be collected and planted, because even a small seed assures survival, because mortars, grenades, and bombs cannot destroy a grain, because our heart is made of seeds. Know what it takes to kill the seeds. Know what it takes to deprive the plant of water, to dehydrate it, to be surrounded by love, but unable to absorb it. So Agent Blue was used to destroy our food supply during the war. Thank you for listening.
those I read Teresa's book a while ago, and I was taken. Well, first I listened to her read in public, but then when I read the book, and I was able to stop and think about the images that I was reading. I was like, I never saw the Vietnam War through the eyes of a Vietnamese. And the first thing that I realized is that I had to change the language to name the reality that I have been absorbing. And that's one of the things that uprisings do. That the first thing is that we have to change the language to name the things that need to be named. In that effort, the title, a poem of my collection. Oh, did I go off? Am I there?
No, you're spotlighted, so we all get full view.
The title poem of my collection, it's also a poem that reconsiders language. It's a poem that is born out of anger, out of realizing that the 20 years the struggle for freedom in my country was being oversimplified in minis on the internet under the label of CIA orchestrated coup d'etats. And I resisted that. This is not what's going on in my country. You are not going to oversimplify what my people have been gone through for 20 years, and I must speak about it. So the first thing, the same way that Teresa says, this is not the Vietnam War, this is the American war in my homeland. The same way I say, this is not a coup d'etat, this is an uprising. And here is your definition. Uprising, noun, a revolt, an insurrection. Verb, to stand up and rise, to rise into view. 1. A human river floods Avenida Libertador and Avenida Bolívar. Pubescent bodies shake behind makeshift shields and masks fashioned from plastic bottles and rags. A violinist and a ballerina perform in front of an armored vehicle. After the musician is captured, his face is rendered unrecognizable. A young woman offers a flower to the line of riot police while the stolid abuela stands in the way of a moving tank. 2. Emaciated souls march single file through the Andes, border crossing rivers swelling with dissent and desertion. 3. On an improvised stage, an unquavering young man swears to protect the Constitution. Hope stands up defiant and takes the oath in front of his peers. Voices rises to describe dystopia in 100 foreign languages. Keyboard warriors tweet the sorrow of a woman carrying the limp body of her teenage daughter. Bloggers comment on seniors lining up for a ration of rice with added bugs for protein. Journalists report of nocturnal dances around currency bonfire. A rezandera struggles with the oxymoron of an oil-rich country without gasoline. Spring meets the silhouette of 2 men. Courage is marked by chained bracelets around their wrists. Eyes hold the images of darkness, torture, isolation. 4. Eyes retreat to see the bright future of a nation slowly climbing the upward slope of freedom. And that's the title poem of the collection, Uprising Alzamientos. The second poem that I'm going to read for you, it's a kind of a wink, kind of thank you, kind of recognition to the people of Colombia who have welcomed 1.7 million Venezuela, fed them, provided medical services, and granted temporary immigration status for the refugees and asylum seekers. Of course, this hasn't been without a toll on their own medical system. This has not been without some resistance on some Colombians. But the fact that our neighboring country and government has decided to welcome our people says a lot about the relationships that have been Venezuela and Colombia have had for centuries. During the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, it was Venezuela that welcomed millions of Colombians because they were fleeing the guerrilla warfare and the narco traffickers. And they went back, and now they're welcoming our people. Not only Colombia, the rest of the South America is also welcoming people, welcoming Venezuela, reluctantly or not. This is where they are heading, and this is where our people are living right now as refugees. 16,076 feet above the sea level. Single file march, plastic bags wrapped around bodies. Hope and oxygen is scarce above the tree line. But Papa Bolívar knew how. Páramo Berlín, Colombia, 16,076 feet above sea level. A two-way road along this stretch in the Andes. 121 miles between despair and uncertainty. On the perilous stretch, marchers discovered death by hypothermia. Between Cúcuta and Bucaramanga, accept food and clothes from the Samaritans of the mountains. On the way down to an unknown future, bodies regain heat despite starvation, and litter the road with broken promises, single file march out of the inferno. And on a lighter note, I wonder what it would be like for furtive lovers in Venezuela during the pandemic. How do they get around it? So I have to imagine the scenario. Mousse de parchita con un cappuccino. Se me antoja un mousse de parchita con cappuccino. Sorry, I'm reading the English version. Mousse de parchita and a cappuccino. I'm craving mousse de parchita and cappuccino. Sweet smell of grass calms my hesitation. Vintage Yamaha XS 650 vibrating between legs. On the way to secret location, I bypass the National Guard checkpoints, colectivos, the paid assassins, express kidnappers, and La Llorona walking around with a crown on her head. Bachaqueros hoarding condoms sell me 2 tits, small plastic bags, 50 grams of coffee and milk. Useless Bolivares bills blanketing the streets of my neighborhood swirl in the wind as I speed by on my bike. Past a tiger head laying in a pile of rubbish, rats nibbling on it, shortage of face masks and latex gloves worn against COVID-19 house visits. I arrive at this darkness where desire awaits me, tantalizes my taste buds, throws me inside out, raw, vulnerable, exposed, blue diamond sparkling on my skin until that turn arrives, at the bottom of the tart, I submit to you, bountiful fruit of passion, savoring the last creamy bite. Back at home, the tits offer a weak rendition of the cappuccino I anticipated, reminding me that to stay alive, I must dare to ride my bike into the night. And the last poem I'm going to read for you is dedicated to Venezuela, and I speak to her as another woman with my working class voice. De mujer a mujer, to Venezuela. Mujer, I talk to you without hair on my tongue, without a drawer inside to hide unspoken truth. Here's a mojito. Take a sip. Young, attractive, educated, and fucking rich, you are anything but naive. You've fallen into every trap. First, they hit on you, wrap you around their pinky fingers, and as soon as you spread your legs, they beat you, kidnap you, rape you, enslave you, starve you, not to enjoy your body. Mind you, you're hot. All they want is to live on your back, fucking pimps. Fanning their testicles, dilapidating your infinite wealth. Is that mojito strong enough? Easy, mujer. I want you alert, not drunk. Es que me echó tierrita en los ojos. You're right. See where his sweet talk brought you. You've become a beggar in rags, eating from the garbage truck, reaching to right and left, hoping for a handout to feed your brood. No puedo ver tanto niño muriendo de hambre. Look at the pimp who said he'll defend you while waving his friend's flags, not yours. Look at his watch, his private jet, his feast for kings. Where do you think that comes from? Door-to-door sales of Avon products? Su verdadera cara escondida detrás de una bandera caduca. Every time a new Jack shows up at your door, warming up your ears, you fall for the same old trick and offer him your botija. With a slumber still heavy on your eyelids, you sit at a low table in the park to play chess. Onlookers stop by to pay attention to your moves. From the sidewalk, I scream to you, my queen. Stop being such a pendeja. Get your children together and set yourself free. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisbeth. That poem, I want to hear it multiple times.
Thank you.
Wow, so many great poems, and I'm just drawn back to where we started this conversation. We were talking about witnessing horror and tragedy as a way to rise up, representing truth, unearthing secrets, and the silences that where truth goes unspoken. And I'm wondering if we can bring back that conversation again. Some of the questions we had outlined for our poets included, what is the language of uprising? How do you make space for anger, for joy, for rest, for self-sacrifice? And is survival enough? I think maybe if we can stop there and hear from our poets again.
I could start I think the language for uprisings is, it's not just a language of survival. It's the language of that we have to use to rewrite history. Because as Deborah had mentioned before in the conversation, usually history is written by the winner, which it tends to be the oppressor. And we need to get ownership of that language and rewrite. Semantics are important. Teresa said, this is not the Vietnam War, this is the American war in a country called Vietnam. And I say, this is not a coup d'etat, this is an uprising. And Deborah says, the uprisings, that nobody pays attention until we riot, right? So I think it's taking ownership. The language of the uprising, for me, I don't know what it is for the others, taking ownership of language and taking the semantics of what we want to say and owning it. Anybody else?
Yeah, and it's also telling our own stories, and we have to insert ourselves into history because we've been written out, and so we have to actively speak out and tell our stories, because that's the only way that our stories will be told. Because when other people tell what they claim to be our stories, they are not telling the truth, or they are only telling part of the truth. And so it is up to us to tell our stories, to pass along the truth of our histories.
And I think, Teresa, you had said something about truth, right? Truth telling. And the idea that there's so much that has been silenced, that we tend to stay on the surface. Whatever is taught to us as history or as what we should know is not what we actually should know. And so how can we bring forth those erasures? What has been erased, what has been hidden or kept in the cracks? And there's this whole notion of decolonizing, which you can take however you want, but how are we also complicit, right, with the systems, and what can we do to overcome that, as a community and as individuals?
Thank you. A lot of our histories for Asians begin in our homelands, and a lot of people, that part is erased. So a lot of people don't understand the history of people from Asia and our diversity as well. We have hundreds of languages, hundreds of different cultures, different foods, different ceremonies. But I think a lot of that has been erased in American culture and history, so that people perceive Asians as like one person with one history, and a lot of times they don't even know our history, and our history really begins on our homelands, and most of the time it's tied to imperialism, and US imperialism going into our homelands, dropping bombs on our homelands, killing, raping our people, taking our lands, and resulting in refugees that come here because of war. So I think it's really important, like you said, that our histories are told, and that so that we don't get erased, and that we tell our stories and the truth. Thank you.
Thank you all for your answers. We have time for a couple of more questions. Let's talk about the emotions of uprising as a poet. How as poets do we make a space for our anger or joy, or to rest, or for self-sacrifice? What do we have to do so that we preserve ourselves when we are uprising against whichever oppressor it is our duty to uprise to?
Well, I write. You know, my poems are too loud. That poem, it encapsulates a lot of the anger that I feel and have felt about how society treats people who are how people are marginalized. They're labeled and then they're marginalized. And so when in that poem, I tried to touch on a lot of different subjects. It didn't particularly talk about racism in that one, but I was talking about about homeless people, people who have mental illnesses, children who are battling, you know, trauma. And the part about the men was one I added later to that poem, because I realized that male abusers are often acting out of their own trauma, you know, their own suppressed trauma. And so we see now, even we talk about guns and violence and what we're seeing with mass shootings in this country, and even with white supremacists, that all is, a lot of that is coming from angry men who feel like they are not heard as well. And so we in this country, we have so much suppressed anger and trauma. This country is a wound. I mean, America is a wound.
Those words. That's a strong word, very strong word. This country is a wound. It's an open wound.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do something collectively to heal, it's going to start festering, because
Right.
if it is not already doing so. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about how do you make a space for your feelings while you are resisting?
I think I was thinking about the word survival, right? Because many of us are so familiar with that. I think we're surviving since we're born, right? We're always surviving, and that's the mode. But I've been thinking about how we make up space by taking up space, right? Like, and I'm not saying like we're gonna overthrow anybody, but we have a right to be sitting at the table with everybody else, right? And so, and that's why we're here. That's why we write. That's why we read. That's why we do what we do. And so, how can we keep occupying those spaces that are also ours? They don't belong to anybody else, right? Like they're just there, right? And that's also a way to uprise, a way to rebel. Yeah, it's so, I feel like all this is so tied up with so many things. I want to say a lot, but I'm like coming up short. So those are my ideas.
See, I remember, I think I read, and I might be misquoting this, but I think I read it was James Baldwin that said, well, not everybody has to go out and protest. Some of us have to write. And I have lived the Venezuelan uprisings from outside. So most of what I write, you can say that is phrastic, because it's based on the images that my siblings and my childhood neighbors sent me about what they experienced on the streets and on the protests, and or whatever is on the news that they may be able to pass to me via WhatsApp. So I have not been there swallowing the tear gas, but I have been at the end of getting all the anguish and all the pain and all the death and burying death in the distance, and the pain of not being, the guilt that you have, like a survivor's guilt for not being able to be there and support them. So I that's when becoming using poetry as a form of protest, as a weapon. I'm not throwing rocks at the police, I'm writing poems to the regime. And it's my way to get up in arms too. So, and I have to channel my anger into some of the poetry so that the anger did not consume me. Because at one point, I remember it was February 2019, after the Guaido took the interim presidency, I was spending nights and nights and nights on Twitter fighting people who did not understand what was going on in my country. So it was getting angry and angry and angry. I said, "What? This is consuming me." And the only way that I found to use that anger to make some meaning and to convey a message was to write poetry instead of having fights on Twitter. And this is where it comes from. So that's how I made a space for my anger.
I think I can really relate to that, Lisbeth, because I think that's one major reason why I write as well, carrying the histories, the trauma of the war and my father's time in prison and his PTSD and the violence of growing up under that PTSD. You carry it in your body, you carry it in your muscles, in your cells, because it makes you who you are. And I found myself repeating these stories over and over, but it was really weighing heavily on me because I was carrying this weight. And when I was able to write the stories down, the poems, I was able to physically separate them from my body.
Yes.
And at the same time, I was able to create that memory and try to look at it with as much compassion as I can for the people that are involved. So I think in being able to do that, it really, I didn't have to keep remembering those experiences and that history, but I didn't have to forget because it was there. It was written as a poem. So I think that was very, very healing for me.
I hear you. I hear you. The last question is that refers to the poetry as survival. Many of us, as we have expressed before, have used poetry as a way to survive what we are going through. But is the goal survivor? Let's not think about an uprising, or let's think it is the pandemic, right? And we are processing by writing poetry. Are we surviving through poetry, or are we doing much more than surviving? What is the role? Is surviving through poetry the goal, or is it there something more?
I think it's more than just surviving. At least in my case, my father died when I was very young, and that's when I first started writing poetry. I'd been an avid reader all my life, but I started writing to deal with his, with my loss. And then later, divorced and a single mom, I started writing again. I'd stopped for a while, and I was able to move past just surviving because, as Leonora said, we've all survived something. We've been surviving since we were born, but at some point it's important to move past just surviving into living our lives. And so I think that for me, writing poetry helped me to begin healing from a lot of trauma in my life. It just helped me to, as Teresa was saying, you get it out, and you distance yourself from it. It's still part of you, but it's not something that you live in. And so I think that writing poetry helps us to move past just surviving.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And also with what Teresa was saying, I love that idea of separating, right? Mm-hmm. Physically, the poem from your body. But for me, it also goes back to that question that I asked at the beginning when I started reading, like finding joy, and because sometimes it's so hard to find joy in this world that we live in. And it's my way of just like digging and exploring the unknown so I can find something to wonder about, to be happy about, to just be proud of. And it's also a way to honor ourselves, honor our communities, our ancestors, our families, right? Like through just, especially like writing and playing with language, right? I feel like I'm a kid again. I'm going back to who I was and who I want to be too. So that's it's a lot, but it's I think poetry, it just fills so many gaps for me.
Yes. I think on my part, it's not just survival. I think it is our role we need to tell what happened. We need to tell what happened. Teresa is doing this 20, 30 years now after the war ended. So Teresa is using her point of view to tell this is what happened. Not what they are telling you in Hollywood. This is what happened. So I think it is that role too. It's not just surviving what happened, but telling it from your point of view. So we are again witness and participants of events that are affecting us in many ways, but also we have the potential to affect or create some awareness on how the events unravel in reality for future generations. So I think it's not a little war, a job. I think it is significant, and we have to take it seriously because we are documenting history as it happens when we write about social justice. And we are not only documenting our point of view or the scenes that we see on the streets, we are documenting the changes that these events are producing in our society and will affect future history. So we need to take these seriously. But it is also important for us to survive in the least affected possible way because it hurts. It hurts living day after day, watching people die on videos with knees on their necks, or watching people, as we do, die in our countries of torture, or watching transsexual women die of a homophobic violence, or Asian people die of a xenophobic hate. So it affects us. So we also need to protect us, and the way to protect us emotionally is through joy, is finding joy, finding the beauty, and poetry offers plenty of opportunities to find beauty and recreate beauty through words.
Yes, I agree with what you say, Lisbeth and Leonora and Deborah. Oftentimes when we read history or when events are happening, the colonial system and the oppressor will dehumanize the people that are being affected, just giving a number of, and I think our job as poets to humanize, to bring the humanity to what is happening, to help people see. I remember the saying, to help people see the invisible, to bring the invisible, to make it visible. And I think that is really, really important, because we live in a system that dehumanizes others, that other people, that make them an other, and also the land, also, and our plant relatives and animal relatives are othered. And I think in poetry, we can humanize and help people see. There's a say, our word in Cantonese for happiness is hoi sam, which means open heart. So I think joy is, and being able to celebrate, I think it's tied to it as well. When we are humanizing and we're making things visible, it's also we're opening our hearts, and there's joy in that as well, in humanizing something at someone. And but celebrating, I think, is really important, and I think that's what poets do as well. They do bring some of that starlight into our lives in whatever form it might take. This has been a real honor and blessing to be with everyone, to hear everyone, and to converse with you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And likewise, I have really enjoyed talking to you and listening to your poetry, listening to your work. Each one from a different point of view and from a different background brings something that we all have in common. We are surviving some sort of oppression, and we are recording it for other people to understand what we are going through, or what we represent are going through. Thank you very much, Cody, again, for hosting us and opening this space for us. And more than grateful for hosting me in this last event, trying to promote my book, Uprising Alzamiento, which will be published by Finishing Line Press in June this year. Today is the last day of the pre-sales period. Pre-sales are important for all writers, not just for me, for all writers, because pre-sales determine the press run. So if you really want to help a poet or a writer make it to the press run, the pre-sales period is the moment when you do so. So I'm posting in the chat room all the information for For pre-sales, you can buy directly from me via PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, or you can buy directly to Finishing Line Press. If you buy directly from me, you get a signed copy. But at this point, I'd rather you go directly to the Finishing Line Press and buy from them, because this is the last day. If you are in the LA area, we can always meet and I can sign your copy. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure reading for you. I'm very happy that you came here to listen to our work and to listen to our discussion and be participant of this conversation.
Thank you. This was beautiful. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Teresa. Hope we meet again. Deborah, one day I have to go to